I will start off saying if I could predict what the government would do here, I would not be in this job. I would be off on an island somewhere, but I wouldn't say that.
People.
I mean, I think we can hope and we can work hard to make sure that the money does land where it needs to go, but I don't anticipate it all will. And so I think we will see places that are underfunded, and we will see places that are getting a larger share than they might. I don't want to say the need. I think we might then get into the discussion of, is 42 billion enough, right?
So let me challenge this question, and I mean, I'm going to go on Ashley's. Is so you have these big players who can really go to the BEAD rules, the NOFOs, of that you have to have a history of network operations, you have to have this letter of credit. Like, I mean, those are rules that not many communities or smaller organizations can play into. So who does get the money? Which it looks like to me that a lot of big incumbents are going to get the money because they can actually play in that sandbox where smaller guys can't.
Yeah, I think
that's something.
I think you really hit on a really important point, is that those in the most need are least apt to have the capacity to apply for grants or challenge inaccurate information. And so I think it's up to the states. Like in Kansas, we heard that, we heard that loud and clear, like economically distressed communities of color, historically disconnected communities are the least apt to have the capacity to apply for these grants, are the least apt to be able to challenge inaccuracies. And so as a state, we're trying to come up with solutions. Like, how do we assist best? How do we provide matching funds in those areas? How do we provide grant writers in these areas? And so I'm really interested in hearing what others have to say on the private side, because I think that's a big deal. Like, the whole point of BEAD is to get everybody connected, especially these communities that have been historically disconnected, or at least of the Digital Equity Act, that 2.75 billion that was also part of the Infrastructure Act. We need to make sure that we're, rising all tides.
So I think it works, but I could be wrong, Kimberly. So one of the models that we are really pushing on is public ownership. When I say we are pushing, again, we are agnostic for the record, but we think one of the strong models, because it's taxpayer dollars going, and we feel like you either have to minimally, if you're so small, you can't own and operate, because you're literally like our county commission has that, and the mayor, and they're like a chicken farmer, a school bus driver, and a retired teacher. They are not going to run and operate a broadband system. They know that, and they're also smart about it. These guys are super smart when it comes to understanding what their capabilities are. So we are looking at either if you must allow private ownership of that network, we still want we want competition on the back end. If you do, you have an IRU, an irrevocable rights of use, which agreement, which means you get a chunk of what is of fiber strands, or a tube of fiber, or whatever, and tower access in perpetuity, so that if your community expands, you are not held hostage by having given that entire contract away. That's like a level one. Another level, the big public-private partnership, and then we have a big push for open access middle mile in the state of Idaho, so that it is paid for by the government, is owned and operated by nonprofits and public entities, and then anybody can tap in on it, and that makes it way more competitive. For we had 129 before COVID, and now we have 150 ISPs in Idaho. It is bonkers trying to find them all. But if they were to, that would be a huge opportunity to have a government funded open access system that they can do last mile and make profit off that, whether you're a big dog or a local or regional ISP. Another big thing that we're doing and I'm sure this seems to be the burgeoning industry. I think I need to get out of the nonprofit business and start one of these. Is this third party management, and we'll just talk afterwards, is a third party that does the management and operations work for, so you own it publicly, you completely contract it out to a third party objective operator. They could be a competitive ISP on that system, but that also allows for competition, and then that is all managed. And I think that is where the growth industry is, where they qualify under BEAD, back to the BEAD qualification, because they have experience in the management and operation, but they're not necessarily named one of the big three. So you actually have these regional companies like Utopia, like others that are in the region. We've been learning about them over the last 6 months or a year, who are willing to do business. And I've been trying to, we've been looking at building that out, but I don't know if that's enough, because I think there's still capacity in these smaller companies.
And I think you're spot on, right? And I don't know, Christina, that Utopia is in Utah, but we are also the operational partner for Idaho Falls Fiber in Idaho Falls, because they wanted to do an open access system, but they were like, we're not a specialization. This is not what we do. So let's go to somebody who does. And we're a governmental agency in the state of Utah, but we can cross state lines of saying, we can provide our expertise. What do you need? In what aspect do you need it of? And I think that operational partnership is where there is a huge amount of demand. But how many people can deliver? I mean, there are I would say, a lot of companies that are coming out of the woodwork now that are telling everybody in a lot of communities around this country that they can deliver and they can build a broadband network and they can operate it. And if you ask their track record, they're like, well, we have nothing. And I think that's the point that I see. Go ahead, Ashley.
I love this conversation, because I would say that just in the last year, and seeing the types of people who have interest in our product, and knowing what Utopia has done and things like that, and the people we're talking to, my entire idea of what the business model really is shifts, and it's exactly what you just said, Christine. And it's a public ownership and an operator. And that operator opens the network to the last mile for one wholesale strong competitor, or multiple open access providers, or ultimately becomes open after a certain number of years. That part of the conversation, I think, is based on your specific area. But the interesting piece is what you were saying, is this open access middle mile, as I think a lot of people are failing to look at current middle mile network managers. So they have, yes, Utopia is a great option, but I don't think that Kim and Roger can go everywhere. So what are
Come on, Ashley. Come on. I mean, come on.
Women can do anything if we've learned something here.
I do see her a lot on LinkedIn on planes. She has her own personal paparazzi, but no, I don't. I don't think she can be everywhere. So I think, as we think about, like you said, who has the operational capacity? I think a lot of them are these regional middle mile network operators, but they're like, well, what are we going to do? How do we expand? How do we not become last mile, but somehow become last mile? So there's a really nice play there in wholesaler open networks, utilizing your regional middle mile network providers. And finding good operational providers. There are some really wonderful operational providers out there that I think are going to make big impacts in this. And I love this business model. I think
I would agree with you, Ashley. And I think everybody on this call podcast would agree, is that own the asset. If you are a community, just own the asset, because I'm seeing all these communities going, well, I'm just going to partner with this private company. And I'm like, so what happens in 15 years that they have you captive? Own your asset, and then put a really strong agreement, like Christina said, into place to protect yourself. I mean, do not use government dollars to give to private companies who are then going to leverage you in the long run.
don't give away the whole boat, right? Like, I think that we've seen, and I think someone needs to do some research on this. You know, I think there are some examples now, multiple, of public-private partnerships that, you know, didn't achieve the goals that the communities asked for. And so what are the ways that the communities can protect themselves? But again, they don't have not all or most communities do not have the capacity to be a full retail ISP.
Yeah, we're actually working on building a template of protections and what that package looks like, so that it can help these underserved communities and counties and regions come up with their own negotiating tool that is, you know, it's worth it for, if you're an ISP and you're going to be awarded the construction and servicing, you know, M&O and servicing of a $4 million or $20 million project. To say, yeah, we'll give you this piece. Because what happened is in CARES Act, and you probably all experienced this as well, it rolled out fast, it was furious, it was totally without guidelines or expectations. And the small communities didn't know what to ask for, or knew that they were entitled to anything. I'm not deserving, you know, that category of leadership. And so they didn't know what to ask for. So we watched a lot of CARES Act money. I mean, our state was 35 million or 45 million. And it went to, thanks for laughing. And it went to 33,000 residents. A lot of it was Wi-Fi. But what was worse about it was that most of it, so it all went to private ownership. I'm all for that. When it works well, where, you know, again, like, it's, you know, everybody's into make a living and a profit. The whole thing, though, that happened, nothing was negotiated for those public entities to have future rights to that project that they awarded, or they were a part of helping achieve that award. So when they came back to say, now that you've connected our residents, connect our community, our public entities don't have any internet, or now that we have this new area going in, what would you charge? And they're like, oh, that'll be X. And it's such an insurmountable number, but they control all the infrastructure that they just got paid by the federal government to put in. And there's no rights by the local entity to negotiate something that's fair and reasonable. So then you get into overbuild. And it seems silly to be paying for something twice, but when the costs are, you know, when there's a monopoly on a single ownership on something, they can drive that. And that's really back to, when you talk about affordable and reliable, we need to be able to have a level playing field.
Yeah, and I would love to hear Christina and Jade's perspective on this. And I think we're starting to see it in Utah, is that a lot of like the CARES money and all this money went for some of these, to connect some of these rural areas, right? But a lot of the politicians who were making these rules didn't know that it was a singly owned asset, and that not multiple people could use it. I think that there's just it's not that people are trying to do bad things, that they just don't understand this industry enough to understand what they're really legislating and putting into policy. Would you agree or like disagree?
I would agree. I don't think that, I just don't think policymakers really understand, they don't understand the economic dynamics of rural America, first of all. And they also don't understand just, I mean, even simple things like, you know, I mean, we know that competition drives down price, but to explain why it's important to have multiple providers in a community to keep, you know, and they could, and, you know, there's price collusion is possible, and it's hard to prevent that, but it can, like, we're not, you know, that's not supposed to be allowed. But the whole idea is, where we have competition on an open access model in Ammon, Idaho, that town has $9.99 a month high-speed internet. And a lot of people complain about it because they say, well, that's not fair and it's impossible to service that. But all the complainers are also on the system serving customers. So it's, you know, it's all about explaining that story and how it works, because you will have the dominant ISPs educating the legislators saying, this isn't fair, this isn't fair, this isn't fair. But when they understand, when a reasonable legislator hears about competition and how it works, they will understand why these models are the next generation.
Well, I really hope that is the case. I mean, hope springs eternal, Christina, because I'm in the thick of this with our EMMBI application and legislators, our congressional delegation actively, maybe working against that based on some lobbying. But I do want to push back a little bit, like open model or open access model. Absolutely. That's what we need in each state. And Kansas is one of those states that has very little middle mile, no open access model. We're one of 5 states that doesn't have a dedicated research and education network. So, I mean, Kansas really needs this kind of model. But when we look at the CARES Act, I think when we're talking about emergency funding, it's really just about getting as many people connected as quickly as possible, right? And so I don't think, I mean, there's a lot of kind of armchair quarterbacking of like how those funds were spent. And I get that because like some of them were wasted, but there was an impossible deadline, 4 months from in Kansas, 4 months that people needed to build out these networks. And I think providers did the best they could with what they were given, and some stepped up, some failed miserably. I, acknowledge that, but totally agree with you about if we can have an open access model, it's of the best benefit to the states. But like when we're dealing with emergency situations, I think CARES did what it was intended to do. Like, even if it was Band-Aids, even if it was sending kids home with hotspots, like people just needed to be able to do homework. You know what I mean? Like, and at the end of the day, it at least imparted to our country how important broadband access was. And like all these things Rose and Ursula has been saying for years, again, like going back to the homework app, like we just need to give people the services they need to thrive and fully participate in our economy and in their education. So yeah, I'm not disagreeing with anything you say. I just think that on the care side, it was a train wreck, but how else is it going to be? It's an emergency situation.
We
right?
learned a lot. The great thing about it, it was a short window, it got deployed, and we learned a lot for this next tranche, right? That we're working with.
Yeah.
And it educated
Absolutely.
us on what to do and what not to do. And it also, I mean, I think it, again, I've described the demographics of Idaho. We have a lot of amazing small to mid-sized ISPs in this state who saw the participation and the performance levels of their competitors. And so they all know the ones who delivered well and were honest players are the cream rises to the top, right? And the word is around. People want to work with them. People want to participate. So I think it's part of what has driven the concept of free markets and competition, right? Is that the good players do more business, and we want that. And they also know about project completion. We talk about a lot now about timeline contracts, clawbacks, all kinds of things to prevent it, which ISPs who are used to doing that and delivering on time, they won't be afraid of those. It's
Exactly.
the ones who take the money and don't deliver. There's a much cleaner way to mitigate that if they don't do the work or complete the work.
And Christina and Jade, I don't disagree with you. This is my perspective on it. Is if there's use of government money to put middle mile in, it should not be only used for one provider. So you should allow put it in as a open access platform. In the state of Utah, we've seen money after money go to connect some of these smaller communities, and it's to one provider who's never going to allow access. And it's like where government funds being used, they should allow multiple providers on those lines. I think that's our whole point at Utopia Fiber, is that we have to stop just giving money to providers who are just going to use it for their monopolistic purposes.
Yes.